So the second design problem statement is, how would you design a fraud identifying system for a company? So as you can see that, this statement doesn't have again much details. It's just like a one-line problem statement. It's saying that you need to create a design which can identify whether a given transaction is a fraud or a not. So as we learned in our previous design thing, is that before we start solving this problem, it's important to ask some of the clarifying questions with the interviewer. So some of the clarifying questions could be like, what kind of a frauds are we getting? Is it happening in one product like online account, or some kind of a bots account are problems, or maybe frauds are happening in the credit card transactions? Is it happening in some specific region which is giving a lot of headaches to the company? Or what is the current benchmark or numbers for fraud detection? So for example, if you have already created some process, some model, or some kind of a system, what is the accuracy rate on that system? And at the same time, we can also check with the interviewer, is there any kind of a business expectation or business metrics with them? So do ask and check the clarifying questions, because that will help you in getting more details from the problem statement, and at the same time you will get very engaged with the interviewer as well. Now once you get all the clarifying questions, details and the answers, the next step is now we can define the goal of our design system. So I can say that, hey, the design, the goal of this design problem is that I want to design an automation fraud system which can catch the fraudulent activity in a timely manner, so that it can provide excellent service to customers that bring peace, secure, reliability in customers' mind. At the same time, there should be minimal impact to our business operations or the reputations or the brand value. And this automated system should exceed the business expectations or the current benchmark numbers. So once we have defined the goal and the objective with your interviewer, now the next step, as we discuss in the problem design system as well, hypothesis. Hypothesis is very important. Maybe it's not important from the point of interviewer, but for your own sake it's very important, because you want to understand why the frauds are happening in the system. Some of the questions will come in your mind, which are the most frequent frauds are happening in the system. Are these frauds are happening in some kind of operating system like Android, or is it happening like in some device like mobile or a web browsing and so on? Which locations or regions are most prone to frauds or suspicious IP address? Are these frauds are happening like during the bank account details? And how are we validating those bank details? And as we want to understand what is the fraud accuracy rate at this moment, and how many times we have missed the fraud. So some of the hypotheses you must write down on the paper, and because this will help you giving direction to your approach, as well as what are the different data sources we need to pick. So once you write down all the hypotheses, the next step you need to provide is the data sources. What are the data sets you are planning to take for this design? And it's very important to communicate to the interviewer what is your thought process, what are the data sources you're planning to take. I can say that for this design problem, I'm planning to take fraud data set, which should have some kind of a columns like timestamp, user details, like regions, operating system, devices, fraud target label, or what kind of a frauds we have seen. Some kind of a customer data, like who are those customers who got impacted due to fraud, what were their email IDs, what was the age of the email IDs, and so on. Bank details, like customer bank details, their validation details. We can also use some external data as well, like age of email ID, current bank status details. But you need to tell them what is the data set you're planning to take. So you need to tell, I can say that instead of taking all the 4 data sets, for me probably I can say I just want to take a fraud data set. That is good enough to solve the problem. So the point here is that you should communicate clearly to the interviewer what is the data source and what is your thought process on that. Then the next step, which is again very critical and very important, is to define your features here. What should be your independent features and what should be your dependent features? I can say, for an example, my independent features would be, let's say, fraud name or a fraud ID, timestamp, geography, fraud label, website, or is a mobile, IP address, and so on. And at the same time, you need to tell, in the training data, what each row uniquely identified. Is it like each row is telling about fraud ID details, or is it aggregated as a customer level, or some like a daily level, hourly level, monthly level? You need to tell what exactly each row means here. Then the second is very important to tell dependent variable, because your dependent variable will tell us whether you're considering this problem as a classification, regression, clustering, or what kind of a problem you're thinking. So I can say for this problem, my dependent variables are classification, like fraud and normal. There will be two classes, fraud and normal. And my output will also tell us, like, probability of failure or a probability of fraud, I can say. So I can say, hey, with this transaction, there is a 90% chance this transaction is a fraud, or a 95% chance is a fraud. So once you have defined your independent features, dependent features, and target label, the next step you need to select, how long you need your training data. Whether you need like last 6 months of historical data, 12 months, 18 months, and how would you want to split your training data? Like, do you want 70% training data and 30% validation data, or 80-20? You need to mention this point here as well. Then the next step is model building. What is the model you're planning to take? As we discussed in the previous design problem, it's very important whichever model you select, whether it's XGBoost, logistic, Naive, decision tree, you need to provide a solid reasoning behind it. What is your intuition, selecting that particular model. And then you can say that, the advantage of this model is that I will get some kind of a probability scores, or some kind of a scores, or a calibrated probability scores. And based on those scores, I can create different tiers level. Like, if the score is coming between 0.9 to 1, then I will say that, hey, this belongs to tier A, and this short, this is a fraud thing. If it falls into tier B, 0.75 to 0.9, then there is a chance this transaction is like a fraud, which we can take the input from the user in the real time, sending a text message or a call to get their input. And if the score is falling into tier C, which is less than 0.5, then it's a normal transaction. We will pass it this transaction. So once we have defined our model, which model are we planning to take, then it comes to the how would you going to evaluate your model. So for example, I can say that I will going to validate my model based on following metrics such as precision, F measure, recall, key statistics. I will also use cross validation to make sure that there should not be overfitting. So you need to provide your rationale behind what are the metrics you are planning to take to evaluate the performance of the model. Now let's say your model has done a great job on the validation data, and let's say on some of the out of sample data, and your business partners are very confident, your senior leadership has given you green signal to migrate into production. So when you decided to move it into the production, what would be your implementation strategy would be? So you can say that, hey, my implementation strategy on the production would be through A/B testing. So 80% of the population, I will split between 80% and 20%. 80% of the population will be evaluate continuously with the old model, but this 20% of the population will be evaluated through a new model what we have built. And this 20% population selection should be very random. When I say very random, means that it should be include like new customer, old customer, sensitive regions, timestamps, different hours of the day, because you don't want to fall into a selection bias. You don't want to select a population which get biased to a certain thing, and suddenly your models are not statistically making any sense. So once you have defined the A/B testing strategy, then the next question will come up: how will you evaluate the results of the A/B testing? So there you can explain that what are the metrics I'm planning to take. You can say that I can still evaluate the performance about the accuracy rate, and then compare that accuracy rate with my existing model. There is a lift in the performance of the new model? Are we seeing that this model is catching up frauds much better as compared to the previous model? So you need to define, or you need to explain to the interviewer what are the metrics here at this time you will take to evaluate the performance of the new model in the production environment. Remember, this is a production environment. So in the production environment, in A/B testing, your metrics might be little different as compared to when you're evaluating the model on the validation data. So make sure that you have a good 2-3 metrics written down which you can mention for your A/B testing. So I can say that one of the acceptance criteria could be from the business point, not from the technical, from the business point would be ease of implementation. How fast it's responding to fraud. What is the estimation cost? What is the estimation cost? Is this new model is beating the old model results or not? So some of the metrics or some of the acceptance criteria you can tell. And what would be your business strategy, like how the admin team or a production team or a business team will see the output. So you can say that this model will show the probability of frauds, like it will say that what is the score for each transaction. Higher the score, higher the chances of a fraud, and it will tell in advance, like in the real time, so that timely actions can be taken, and eventually it can stop the fraud being happening. Then the next part is again very important. You need to explain what are the challenges are there in this whole approach. You can say that sampling is very important for A/B testing, because you don't want to fall into a selection bias in the A/B testing. You should not fall into a bias criteria that and you don't want you want that 20% population to be very diverse, very random, so that it can be a representative of most of the segments of your population. Another challenge could be, since it's a fraud data set, so training data set will going to be unbalanced, because obviously you expect that in your training data 99% or 95% of the data points will be normal, and remaining 3% to 5% will be a fraudulent. So your data set will going to be very unbalanced. So that could be a challenge when you're building your model. Another challenge, you can say that, hey, since this is a fraud model, and every day, every week, every month, or in fact every hour, new frauds are been creating. So it's very important for our model to be retrained frequently, maybe once in a quarter, with a new refreshed data set, so that our model should be up to date with the new fraudulent things. Then obviously, how would you communicate this whole approach to tech users and the business users? So you can say that, hey, for tech users, I will explain the whole approach in a more mathematical approach, more data science concepts, statistical results. Whereas when I'm going to explain this whole end-to-end approach to business users, I will typically use more like timelines, cost involved, ease of convenience, shared output and results through Power BI or Tableau. And finally, my implementation strategy would be like, I will use some kind of agile process. I will create like a diverse team of people where I should have like some data engineers, SME, fraud SME, data science modelers, scrum masters, team leaders, and so on. So this is how we can build like an end-to-end design problem, where we are covering each and important point of it. As I mentioned before as well, there is no right or wrong answer, and this approach is not like the best approach, but definitely it will help you in creating a structure and organization to your answer, to your approach, and make sure that you are explaining end to end. As I explained before as well, if you get an opportunity like a whiteboard or a drawing board or some kind of a notepad, do use that one to write down your points, or maybe create a flow chart, because that is easy to explain to interviewer through diagrams or flow chart or some write-up, as compared to explaining the whole approach through verbally. So do take advantage of if you get whiteboard, drawing board or a text pad. Thank you.